the most convenient. And I hand you over to Michael O'Reilly, who most of you probably recognise. If you don't know him, he's chair of the Dublin Trades Council, and Dublin Trades Council, of course, took a very important role during the 2013 lockout. So, Michael O'Reilly.
Okay, well, I want to welcome you all back to the school. We're going to look at the challenges to the trade union movement from the perspective and background of the partnership agreement, the pro-park agreement, the Haddington Road agreement, and the many things that have been happening to the trade union movement as the economy has collapsed, and hopefully explore what some of the difficulties are and perhaps what are the solutions. What kind of trade unionism, for example, do we need to respond to this kind of situation? What does, should the unions be more radical? Should they try and re-establish partnership? Should they go for a more independent kind of point of view? Should they be campaigning organisations, or just try and get their feet under the table with the state again to look after things that way? These are problems that have been argued about in the trade union movement for years, and there's no real consensus as to how or what the right model is. And I have to say, not only in the Irish trade union movement, but really in the global trade union movement, all over the world, trade unionists are faced with these problems. We heard it with Joe Jennison and all that today. Our first speaker, I have to say, we are short one speaker. Michael Taft is down at the Kennedy
right
School.
here.
Oh, he's here! Oh, he's here! He told me that he was asked to speak at the Kennedy School, and they said to him, what can America do for Ireland? And I suggested to him that they could buy it off the Germans. Anyway, our first speaker today is Brian Campbell. He's the General Secretary of NIPSA. He's a member of the Executive Council of the ICTU, and he's our first speaker.
Thanks, Mick, and thank the organisers for the invite. You settled down. I'm not going to be making any earth-shattering contribution today, I can tell you. What I want to do is look at some of the challenges and develop a few ideas, hopefully, about where the trade union movement should be going. I mean, in some respects, it's easy to complicate matters when you're looking at what's happening. And I think what we need to be doing is trying to, the situation is obviously complex, but what we need to be doing is trying to reduce things to as simple and as straightforward elements as we possibly can. I suppose the first question is, I'm not dealing with the partnership element of it, but I'm happy to make comment on it at some stage. I'm dealing with the challenges, I suppose, in the way forward strategies for the trade union movement. Really, what are they? What are the challenges? And I suppose one has been, the first one I would say has been the inability to shape the type of society in which we live. And that's from a political and industrial perspective. But it's clearly not a problem which is peculiar to Ireland, north or south, or to Europe. And really at the heart of that, I think that that is really inequality, social and economic inequality. Massive gaps between the haves and have-nots. So I think that's in terms of effectiveness, in terms of influence in the type of society that we have, is clearly there's a lot that haven't been that effective. You may have a debate in terms of what happened over the partnership period and that. I think another element in terms of is the industrial weakness across the economy, particularly in relation to those areas where trade unions aren't organised, or parts of the economy where you can't get in, or where particularly in multinationals in certain sectors which don't. There's a saying, I think it was Lord Craigavon or whoever it was, he said he wouldn't have a Catholic about the place. Well, this is he wouldn't have a trade unionist about the place, as I suppose the trade union sort of reading of that. And I think the third point that I would make is that there is in the current time that we live in, there's a disjoint, or a lack of resonance between the trade union movement and the communities, the working class communities, both rural and urban. And I think there is a big issue, and it was touched on earlier on. I think the question was asked, of one of the earlier speakers at this morning's session. But there's a big issue there about how can the trade unions become, I suppose, a more organic part of the community and vice versa. And I suppose in the past, before you had the deindustrialisation, particularly in the UK, and even to some extent in the north, where you had communities who were associated with the workplaces which were around the corner. In other words, you had factories or steelworks or coal mines, then the local communities were tended to be dominated by those people, and therefore their interests clearly, obviously coincided. And I think there's an issue there about trying to ensure that sort of I suppose political and social culture within working class communities has trade unions at the heart of it. Now it's easy said, but I think those are some of the challenges. And I think that sort of weakness in the community, and maybe that's a bit of a mechanistic way of looking at it, but that weakness in the community, I think, inevitably translates into how people vote and what type of political representation people in favour of. Labour, socialist type of political representation, I think, is the weakness of that reflects on it. So I think those are some of the challenges, but also clearly from a trade union perspective, we're in a period, and it depends on which country you're in terms of the extent of this. We're in a period where the neoliberal agenda, the neoliberal project has really at its heart, leaving aside it's the seeking out of more areas for capital in order to maximise profit. But I think also at its heart is the dismantling or the weakening of the influence of trade unions, because they are, I suppose, an obstacle on the route to increasing and enhancing profit. So we have had, I know in terms of trade union legislation, it's much more difficult, I think, irrespective of what jurisdiction you're in, to take action on behalf of workers. The 100th anniversary of 1913, and the whole debate on adherence and promotion of the sympathetic strike as a fundamental part of the armoury in the class struggle. The sympathetic strike where other workers who come to the aid of workers who were in struggle, and that is virtually illegal. It is illegal. Secondary picketing, and the processes and legal processes that you have to go through in order to respond to challenges either from employers or government generally. Whether there's a big legal issue involved in this, but for instance in the UK, you can't have a political strike. You can't go on a strike against government policy. You can't ballot. It has to be a trade dispute. The definition of a trade dispute is narrow. Although there are people who say that the trade union should be challenging that ruling through the European Union and through the European Court of Human Rights in respect of the right to have that type of strike. So that there's a whole range of obstacles and difficulties which the trade unions face. And again, if the trade union's effectiveness is undermined, if your effectiveness is diminished, then that's going to have an impact upon what your members think. It's going to have an impact upon what your members' families think and what local communities think. And if you aren't able to deliver because of all these restrictions, because of economic circumstances, then that's another difficulty that you have to contend with. Now, we had a discussion this morning. I think Joe Jamieson gave us some details in terms of union density in the US from the beginning of the last century or thereabouts, and the decline was significant and noticeable, and there has been significant declines in trade union density in a number of European countries, particularly in the UK, and I think there's been also a decline in the Republic of Ireland. The way in which the trade unions have been responding to the decline in membership has been around the organising agenda, around different methods of engaging with workers, different methods of engaging with their own members. And I think that the organising agenda is essential, but I don't think on its own the organising agenda, I mean, it was just a means of promoting the policies that we have at the moment. It was just a means of convincing people to belong to a trade union movement, because when you look at the figures, the trade union density across the various European Union countries, for instance, I think Finland's at the top, and France is at the bottom, with Finland's I think 71% trade union membership in the workforce. France is 8%. I think Ireland is around about 30, near the low 30s. But then when you look at if you look at France, when you see the CGT and whoever else blocking the roads and out in the streets, that 8% doesn't seem like 8%. It seems like maybe 80%. But then again, this is linked in, I think, to there's an argument that for societies to be more equal, for there to be a fair distribution of wealth, for there to be bigger controls on private capital, you need trade unions. So you need strong trade unions. But it depends also on what the state is as well, in terms of what sort of policies, what laws they have in these areas as well. So, there's an argument to be said that it's not just the density of the trade unions which leads to an effective trade union movement. But I think nobody would argue that a high density of trade union membership is important. But I would just caution that high density on its own doesn't necessarily deliver what's required. There is a trade union commission which has been set up by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and that I suppose is a response to what is considered to be a crisis within the trade union movement, a crisis of organisation, a crisis of direction, a crisis of being able to properly represent the interests of our traditional constituency. And out of that, I suppose, who knows what will come out of it. I think the sort of discussion that has been initiated is essential, it's important. But I think one of the things that that is going to come out of it, should come out of it, I think, is a clear vision of the type of society that trade union movement supports. Really, it's a political vision. So there needs to be a clarity in that, and there'll be differences of opinion, no doubt, within the trade union movement. But as basic, that's a basic discussion that's required. Another element of this is more rationalisation of structures. Fine.